Hello, it's Grandma Karen. You know what a good stitch and bad stitch look like now. Today we're going to learn to wind the bobbin. We will be talking about the Bernina 440. Let's talk a little about thread. We will talk more about thread in several other lessons. I found that some beginners are frustrated when they try to find the start of the thread on a new spool of thread. These two spools have a slit where the beginning of the thread is. I call it the thread tail. On the left thread, the tail is in the slit. With the right thread, I have to peel the paper label back a little to see the slit. If the slit is hard to see, use a marker to make the slit easier to find. When you take the thread off the machine to put it away, this slit is where you can park the thread tail to keep the threads from getting tangled. We will talk about other ways to find the thread tail in another lesson. Before the thread goes onto the spool pin, you may have to pierce the paper label to find the hole. You could just tear the paper off, but there is often useful information on the label, so I don't usually tear it off. Instead, I use a small pair of scissors or a metal nail file and punch a hole in the paper at each end of the spool. Spools of thread come in lots of sizes and shapes. We are going to look closely at the way thread is wound onto spools. The threads in this photo are called stacked threads. The threads form a kind of stack like a smokestack. It is wound onto the spool one row on top of the next row. The rows go up the spool and then back down the spool. Stacked spools need to spin while you are sewing. Look at this ribbon. If I pull from the side of the spool, it comes off straight. If I pull the ribbon from the top or the bottom of the spool, the ribbon begins to twist and twist with each round that it comes off. If the stacked thread is coming from the side, like this spool right here, then it is not getting twisted. It is just staying straight as it goes, and that will give you good tension. It needs to spin when it's coming off the spool. These spools have the thread wound around the spool in a different way. The thread crosses over itself diagonally each time it goes around the spool. This is called cross-wound thread. The thread needs to come off the top of the spool so it doesn't twist. It is opposite from stacked thread. The thread does not spin, it just comes off the top. So why do we need to know the difference between these two kinds of thread spools? Because we need to put the spool of thread on the correct spool pin so that it unwinds the correct way. Remember that there are two different spool pins, horizontal and vertical. Some machines, like this one, have both kinds. Some machines only have a vertical and others only have a horizontal spool pin. Stacked thread goes on the vertical spool pin so it can spin around without getting twisted. For some spools, it may make a difference if the spool is spinning clockwise or counterclockwise. Follow the diagrams in your machine's guidebook. Cross-wound threads go on the horizontal spool pin so it can pull off the top of the spool. This stitch note is to help reinforce this principle. If you are having problems with bad stitches or breaking threads, try to follow this. Stacked thread does best on the vertical spool pin. Cross-wound thread does best on the horizontal spool pin. Your sewing machine has two threads. One is called the top thread. The other is called the bobbin thread. This is a bobbin. A bobbin goes into the bobbin case and then into your machine. A bobbin will hold a lot of thread, but eventually it will run out and you will have to put thread on it again. You must use Bernina bobbins. Get them from your Bernina dealer. Other bobbins may look similar, but they will not be an exact fit. Here's a stitch note to help you remember something important. It says, using the wrong bobbin in your machine can cause bad stitches, bad tension, and can cause thread jams. Bernina has several types of bobbins. Your machine takes the silver bobbins. The blue arrow is pointing to your type of bobbin. The brown arrow points to an older version of the silver bobbin. It will also fit in your machine. Let me show you how to thread the machine from the vertical spool pin. Pull the spool pin up and into place. I put my stacked thread here. If the spool is very large, then I put one of these foam discs under the spool. The spool should be turning clockwise. Let's look and see. This is not turning clockwise, so I'm going to turn it over, and now it's turning clockwise. Take the tail of the thread over to this tiny little thread guide loop here. Hold the thread between your two hands, place the thread on this right side, and pull over and see how it just pops in there. Go around the front of this pretension stud right here. There's an arrow on the machine that helps you do it the correct way. In our last lesson, we learned about tension. The little pretension disc makes the thread going to the bobbin winder have the same amount of tightness the whole time the bobbin is winding. As you bring the thread over to the bobbin, the thread is crossing over itself right here. Then we're going to take the bobbin, and your bobbin has a little rough edge inside. You're going to take this and you're going to again follow the arrow, and you're going to wrap this around the bobbin about 4 or 5 times. Set the speed to about halfway. You don't want to go real fast while you're threading your bobbin. If you've forgotten how to change the speed, go back to lesson 5. Your machine has a separate motor for the bobbin winder. You do not need to push the foot control to make it go. Just push the engaging lever to the left. But we're going to turn on our machine first. Now I'm going to push this over and you'll see that it winds. So if when you start doing this it's really not catching on there, then wind it around a couple more times or hold on to your thread, and that will help it to start. The bobbin will stop spinning when it's full. Automatically this will pop over, or you can stop it like I did anytime you want for how much ever thread you want to put on your bobbin. You can remove the bobbin and then you can cut the thread with the little thread cutter that's on here. This photo is a close-up of the threading path from the vertical spool pin. I marked it with a thick marker. Maybe this will be a little easier to see. Now to wind the bobbin from the horizontal spool pin for your cross-wound threads. You will need this foam disc on the spool pin first, and then you're going to also need a spool disc. So I'm going to put this spool disc on here. Your machine came with 3 different sizes of spool discs. You may also hear me call them spool caps. The spool cap holds the spool in place so it doesn't go flying off the spool pin and so that it doesn't get tangled. This shows the 3 different spool caps that came with your machine. The caps are placed in front of the spools of thread that I would use them with. So for the horizontal, instead of going through this little loop, we're going to put it through the rear thread guide. You're going to hold this between both of your hands, put it underneath, and just pull up, and that's how it goes in there. Then we're going to do the same thing that we did our last time. Wrap it around the pretension disc in the way that the arrow is showing, making sure that those are crossed over, and then I'm going to take the tail and I'm going to wrap it around my bobbin in the direction of the arrow. I'm going to go 3 or 4 times, 5 times, whatever it takes. And there it goes. And then again, I can stop it whenever I want, or I can wait until it's full, and then the engaging lever will pop over. Take it off, use the thread cutter. This photo is a close-up of the threading path from the horizontal spool pin. What does a well-wound bobbin look like? This top photo shows you. The thread is even from the top to the bottom. It looks tight. The bottom photo shows what happens if the thread is not around the pretension stud correctly. The thread is not stacked evenly and it is mushy on the bobbin or loose and stringy. You cannot use a bobbin like this in your machine. You will have terrible stitches. If you don't have the thread wrapped around the bobbin correctly, it may wind onto the bobbin winder stud instead of around the bobbin. Stop winding the bobbin if you see this happening. Push the engaging lever to the right and it will stop. Take the bobbin off and unwind the thread that is wound around incorrectly. Start again. Trim off any threads sticking up on the bobbin or going over the edge. They can interfere with the bobbin and also cause bad stitches. Here's another stitch note to help you remember. For better stitches, cut off thread tails close to the bobbin. Do not have thread wrapping over the edge of the bobbin. Sometimes when you turn on your machine, you may hear a small sound. Can you hear it? It's the bobbin winder. The engaging lever can accidentally get pushed to the right. Just push the lever back over and the noise will stop. It is time for your homework. Show your mentor that you can do the following. 1. Show or describe the difference between cross-wound and stacked threads. 2. Put your spool of thread on the correct spool pin using the foam under the spool when needed. Use the correct spool cap if needed. 3. Turn down the speed. 4. Properly wind the bobbin. And 5. Use the thread cutter on the bobbin winder lever to cut the thread. In our next lesson, we will learn to thread the top of the machine and put the bobbin onto your machine. See you next time. And here's a note to the mentor. In our next lesson, we will need thread, a bobbin with thread on it, and the sewing machine. We will learn to thread the top of the machine and learn to thread the bobbin. Having the guidebook handy will be helpful. See the mentor's note from Lesson 6 for thread recommendations. Thank you for helping someone learn to sew.